Afternoon, everyone. My name is Heidi Meyer, and I am the Interim Dean of the Montehuja College of Business here at Cleveland State University. I'm also a professor of accounting here at the college, and I'm happy to welcome you to our September 2022 Cornerstone Speaker Series today. Today, our topic is supply chain innovation. Serving as our moderator is Dr. Moon-Won Chung, who I'm very happy to introduce. Dr. Chung is an assistant professor in the Operations and Supply Chain Management Department here at the Montehuja College of Business. He studies new technologies and how they are applied to supply chains. We are very appreciative to Dr. Chung to serve as moderator today, and I will now turn it over to him to introduce our panelists and speakers. Thank you, Moon-Won.
Thank you very much, Heidi. So I just want to say today we are very happy to have two great speakers to share knowledge in supply chain innovation. And first we have Kristi Montgomery. Kristi Montgomery is the Vice President of Innovation, Research and Development at Kenco Logistics Services. And she's a dynamic explorer of strategic innovation and the executive leader of Kenco Innovation Labs. This is a dedicated team focused on digital transformation and industry innovation. Kristi practices applied innovation that will deliver value for 200 plus customers that Kenco serves. Next, we also have Geoff Gates. Geoff Gates is the Senior Director of Data and Technology for Supply Chain and Support Services at Cleveland Clinic. In his role, he leads a multidisciplinary team with direct oversight of data management, procure-to-pay technology deployment, and innovation in both the US and the UK. So Kristi and Geoff, thank you very much for joining us today. We invited you here today to tap into your expertise and experience to learn about supply chain innovations. But before we begin, as we all know, innovation is a very broad term, and supply chain innovation should add some differentiated meaning to it. So allow me to first set the grounds through a brief intro for today's discussion. So according to Schumpeter, innovation is not only about inventions of new products and services, but also the activities and processes designed to commercialize these new ideas, and also the organizational capability to continuously renew itself. So today, if time allows, we want to discuss both of these aspects of innovation. For the first part, activities and processes, perhaps that's what supply chain management is all about. And we add supply chain management on top of innovation, then we're talking about changes to processes in an organization and inside the entire supply chain. And probably this can be done by rethinking the supply chain network structure, doing some technology adoptions, or redesigning the internal and external processes within their supply chain. And for the second part, we all understand that innovation is difficult, but that is why perhaps we do it to create perhaps a sustainable competitive advantage. In the end, because all these changes may impact how we do things in the supply chain, innovating the supply chain is definitely not easy. There may be complex interactions with the intangibles within the supply chain, things like the organizational culture, resistance, technology readiness, and the list goes on. Or it can cause conflicts among the supply chain partners as well. So in the end, supply chain innovations are difficult, but especially to observe and also to imitate, and building an innovative culture is perhaps even more. So we hope in today's discussion, we can touch on these topics as well. So in the meanwhile, Heather and I will be monitoring the chat room, and we'll be pulling out questions from the audience for later in this session. So for starters, starting with Kristi, and then moving on to Geoff, can you tell us, as openers, what your primary objective and needs for supply chain innovation and in your client supply chain are about?
Sure, thank you. Kenco services a lot of customers in every industry vertical there is almost. And so it becomes very difficult when you look at how the world is changing and how consumer demand is changing to help our customers level up, so to speak, transform their supply chains. And so for us, it's really about how do we help them look ahead, what's trending, what's happening, what's coming down the pike 3, 5, 10 years from now, and let's start preparing for it now. Let's not be caught off guard. Let's not be in a position where we're can't be resilient in the face of a crisis or a disaster like a pandemic, for instance. So those are the challenges we're trying to solve for our customer on any given day. And for us, it's about really their supply chain. So we are a service organization. We don't have a supply chain of our own, so to speak. So we're really trying to help them get the toilet paper to the shelf, or the wood to the hurricane victims, or whatever the case may be. We're helping them level up their supply chain. So that's what my group is tasked with within our organization.
Thank you very much. And probably with all the pandemic going on and definitely supply chain crisis issues happening everywhere, I could really see like a lot of clients really needing help with better organizing their supply chains and all. Turning to you, Geoff, what about Cleveland Clinic?
So when we look at innovation, a lot of it really revolves around efficiencies. What can we do to optimize the labor and the resources that we have? So the kind of generic term that we use is that we want our teams to be working at top of licensure. And so whether that's, removing a clinical resource from, placing orders, managing their own inventory, or it's our own internal teams, when it comes to, the most efficient way to get a product into the facility and ultimately up to the patient. Our kind of process really revolves around how do we, take the best advantage of the resources that we have in that. The second piece is just whatever is going to increase, our availability to serve our end users. And so, again, our goal is to make sure that, in any type of procedure or for any patient, when, a doctor needs a product, or, when a nurse is, going to pull something from a room, that product is there. And so we want to make sure that we have the right tools to enable that to happen, and that we don't receive the complaints that I ran out of inventory, something wasn't available, things like that.
Nice. And I would say, since we're in Cleveland Clinic is in a healthcare environment, the ultimate objective is going to be slightly different from other like traditional manufacturers or supply chains out there, where they have a strong focus on managing the cost and managing the efficiencies. But probably you have to think a little bit more in a different way, thinking more about the patients.
Yeah, I mean, our kind of overarching goal is always patients first. So we want to make sure that, again, whatever we're doing is supporting that. So, there are certain avenues that we'll take, and there's certain things that we will do to always ensure that we have product. But we still want to make sure that we're doing it in the most efficient way possible. It's not kind of an open checkbook of just, whatever we want to do. We have to be very mindful of all of those costs as well.
Thank you. So then moving on to more details, can you, again, starting with Geoff this time, can you give us some successful examples of supply chain innovations that you've recently made?
Sure. The one that comes to mind the most is we were probably one of the first hospitals across the country to start using RFID in our procedural spaces. So whenever a product that is an implant or other high dollar item comes into the hospital, we will tag it with an RFID tag that contains all of the product information. So it has, the exact item, it has the lot, the serial, the expiration. And what that does is that creates the visibility to us to know where all of our inventory is across the enterprise at any given time. So we can use that one to manage expired products so that we don't have anything expired sitting in a procedural space. But in the circumstances where, maybe one of our hospitals on the east side needs a product, we can very quickly look and say, okay, well, we have that at our main campus, or we have it at another hospital. Let's just move it between locations. If we ever have a product recall, we can pretty instantaneously look and see if we have that product in stock and take it out of inventory to make sure that we've got the right, level of quality patient care. So that's probably been the biggest one that we've undertaken. That was not just a supply chain initiative. There was benefits to our clinical resources as well, because they're able to take the information off that RFID tag and do all of their documentation as well. So, when they're doing a procedure, they're capturing that information, and it's reduced a lot of touch points for them as well, of having to go between systems, having to write stuff down, having to keep manual logs of what was used during a procedure. So that's probably been the biggest one that we've been rolling out, really over the last 4 or 5 years.
And going with you, Kristi, can you also talk about some examples of supply chain innovation projects or initiatives?
Sure. So I'll give you three different examples, starting with probably the longest and most expensive, and down to the least expensive. So for one of our industrial heating and air companies that we work with, we have a distribution center that's about 600,000 square feet, and a good bit of that was taken out by, just parts, replacement parts, parts for new HVAC systems, and it's commercial, residential, all those things. And so we had a lot of racking and shelving taken up by all of these different parts. As you can imagine, they have, 50, 80,000 SKUs in the building. And so these tiny little locations for all of these different size parts. And so we recently implemented an auto store, which is a fully enclosed robotic ASRS shuttle system that houses 8 bins high in a, like I said, an aluminum grid. So we reduced the footprint from about 40,000 square feet down to 13. I'm sorry, 400 down to 13. And so we greatly increased the capacity and throughput of the warehouse because we gave them more space. And we consolidated that product into this very small area, but also we increased our picking rates considerably, from about 30 lines an hour to about 400, which you can imagine what that did for temporary labor for us. So we in our industry have to use a lot of temporary staffing, temp labor to peak up and down. And this allowed us to eliminate a lot of that uncertainty within the supply chain for our customer. It was about a $5 million project with an 18-month payback. So took us about 2 years to get it fully implemented. It takes about a year to order an auto store, by the way. So you order it, they build it overseas, they ship it to you, and then they stand it up on your site. So that was probably the largest one. Then we recently implemented autonomous mobile robots, Locus Robotics, in one of our facilities for e-commerce fulfillment, really helping our folks on the floor pick products faster and eliminate the travel time where they're walking so much among the shelves picking product. So that was another win for us. We went from 30 to 50 lines per hour to about 120. With the locust bots, and accuracy went up as well. And they are cobots, so they work with the people, which was a very different environment. There were some challenges there, and I'll talk about that in a minute, of adoption. And then our most recent one was really a mobile application. So the biggest challenge we face in our industry today is just getting labor to be in the warehouse, right? To show up and move boxes every day. So, we created a program within our human resources group around the first year experience, and our innovation lab enabled that with a mobile app that really drives action points all along the way of when somebody is onboarded into our system or into our company, all the different touch points that you need to make to keep that person happy, retained, feeling like they're connected, they're collaborative, somebody cares about them within the organization. There's just a lot of activity driven within that mobile app to make sure that we're hanging on to those really good folks that we hire after that first year, because most of your turnover happens within the first year of employment. So that one was a big win for us as well. But simple, if you think about it. I mean, it didn't take us long to write a mobile app, but it really has driven a reduction in our turnover rates considerably.
Wow, those are great projects. A lot of them focusing on advanced robotics, which comes into my mind. Remember, Geoff, I also had a visit to the Cleveland Clinic Warehousing Center, and I believe Cleveland Clinic also has similar robots of your own that kind of does similar work. Can you talk a little bit about the details of that as well?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about that while Kristi was speaking too. So at our main campus, we cover roughly a 14 block area. And so moving not only product, but other, things like packages, trash, linen, things like that. It's a pretty tall task to move across the campus. And so when we opened up the Miller Pavilion, which is the new main part of the campus back in 2008, 2009, we built a service center that sits kind of on the west side of the campus now. And what we've used is automated guided vehicles to transport things from that service center up to the main part of the hospital. So we have about a fleet of about 80 robots that, really on demand can move a cart of, medical supplies, of linen, of food, of trash from that service center where all of our receiving activity is up to the hospital. And those robots will basically park in the basement. They'll leave their cart there, and then someone will take it up to kind of complete that last mile of delivery. But that's been a huge advantage to us. I mean, from a labor standpoint, we do roughly 2,500 trips a day, so it supplements a lot of labor. But even from a health and safety standpoint, like moving 1,000-pound linen cart from point A to point B is a pretty monumental task. Even just doing it for the last mile, not having to do it for the whole trip is a pretty big savings, from a safety standpoint.
Right. Yeah, seeing those robots were really interesting. Back to Kristi, I was also wondering, for those robot implementation, does Kenco Logistics have like an in-house robotic expertise that you guys come up with robots or develop them and then fit to the customer's needs, or where do these robots come from?
So they are generally on the market. What we will do, though, we're not trying to build robots ourselves. There's way too many companies out there doing that. But what we will do is come in the early stages of some of the newer companies that are building these robots and allow them to come into our warehouse lab, which is 10,000 square feet of like a real live warehouse environment. It's hot, it's cold, it's dusty, it's pollinated, it's whatever it is outside. That's what you're going to get in our warehouse. Most of our warehouses are not pharmaceutical food grade, by the way. We do have some because we're in that space, but unlike Geoff, ours are, we have air conditioning parts and things that are not so clean. So we'll work with those robotic vendors to really make sure that their products are usable in a warehouse environment, but also a lot of times, drive a little bit different. They thought they were going to make this robot do X, and we're like, yeah, but the most value is going to be found if you could do Y. And so we're helping drive a little bit of their vision for where the tool could go and what gaps it could fill in the industry that are not currently being serviced by one that's on the market. So that's how I roll in it. So Locust, for instance, has been on the market for quite a few years now. That's not a new tool. We purchased that. AutoStore the same way. So our goal is more to work with those who have the robotics expertise, although I do have a robotics engineer on my staff. So really to help work with those vendors and drive a better product at the end of the day.
I see. So when I was visiting the Cleveland Clinic, I noticed the robots there are mostly fully automated robots where they automatically do the picking work and then the moving work by themselves. But then, Kristi, you mentioned about the project, the Locust Robotics, where you've decided to go with cobots. So that probably has like both pros and cons to it. And you briefly mentioned about the challenges that are also associated to that. So I want to touch upon the next question about, can you talk about the challenges that you faced in that innovation or implementation and how you had to deal with those?
Sure. And I'm sure Geoff would agree with me. The biggest challenge is always the people involved in the project or the people you're implementing the project for. So it's adoption, it's communication, it's ensuring that they understand why you're making this change, because supply chain tends to be a very static industry, I'll say. Prior to the last few years, these are our standard processes. This is the way we do things. And quite frankly, we find a lot of efficiencies when we have standard processes and people do things the same way every time. Then we can drive a level of labor compliance, right? So a lot of times when we're coming in with an innovation solution, whether it's a robot or it's a mobile app or it's a labor management system, whatever it is, it's really changing the paradigm of how they do their work. And so you really have to bring those people in on the front end and have that conversation with them about why we're doing this, what we're hoping to achieve, and what their role is in it, and how at the end of the day it's going to benefit them. I tell my team all the time, we have to define the what's in it for me. If you can't define that for them, they don't care why you're doing this, and they're not motivated to help you make it succeed. And a lot of times, if you're really upending the way they do their job. They may even go the other way and try to sabotage you because they don't want it to be successful. They're happy the way they do things. And so I think just change management, adoption, communication for anything new that you're trying to roll out, whether it's an innovation or not, it is the biggest challenge you're going to face.
I see. So touching on a similar issue, like Geoff, you started with the talk about the RFID project, but a lot of people may think, you know, if you're just putting tags of RFIDs and you're using the machines to scan those out, could there be really a lot of change and a lot of challenges introduced by an implementation like that? But then can you also tell me about those challenges that you faced for the RFID project or even also the robotics project?
No, I mean, like Kristi said, a lot of it is the change management piece of it. So, you know, when we did the RFID, I mean, the RFID was a component of a larger project. You know, there was other things that came with it. And that's largely where a lot of the change management comes in. So, you know, we aligned resources under supply chain as part of that initiative. You know, we introduced electronic ordering and kind of an electronic inventory management system as part of that as well, where they maybe historically were, you know, writing things down on paper or keeping track of it in Excel. You know, all of a sudden now they have an iPad with an RFID wand and all of these tags. And so managing through that piece, you know, from a pure change management, you know, point of view was, you know, a huge part of what we focus on. I'd say there's probably some areas where we've done that better than others. And it's one of the things that we continually evolve. We're actually going to be in the process of adding a true kind of change management resource to our teams to help with this on an ongoing basis. But, you know, to Kristi's point, you have to kind of show, you know, really what's in it for them and have those conversations. And then, you know, the other piece that somewhat becomes a challenge is that, you know, it is a standard, right? You know, we've implemented what we call a global model where, you know, we've really reduced the amount of systems that we're using. We've standardized it across the enterprise. And, you know, as we have new locations that we open or, you know, we acquire locations, you know, we're bringing that model to them. And so, you know, we just need to be realistic on, you know, how we're going to do that. You know, what are the implications of that? What's going to change? And that's just purely from a technology, you know, point of view. In our case, we also will bring in new products, right? We'll standardize them to the same portfolio of products that we're using everywhere else. And so it's the same degree of change management and education that we have to do with the technology implementation.
Right. So definitely there will be resistance to change. So that kind of resistance could be one thing. And then also, even after you implemented those technologies, you have to ensure compliance and ensuring the employees, everyone, including your supply chain partners, are on board. So can you give us examples of like programs or some kind of incentive policies that ensure the meaningful use of those implemented technologies, just to make sure those technologies are properly assimilated throughout the entire supply chain or now is included as part of their routine work? For these innovations. Geoff, can you talk about some of those examples there?
Yeah, a lot of what we build around it is around some of our KPIs and our dashboards. So, you know, we have the ability to see who is and is not using the system. You know, we can spot kind of high level trends and then drill into them as we need to. You know, I think the one advantage that, you know, we've seen is we've kind of adopted this global model is that it is a little harder to work around the system, which, you know, I think definitely helps get, you know, everybody on the same page. But by and large, we've managed it through, you know, dashboards and reporting so that we can show where there's deviations from the norm. And that's kind of an ever evolving process. I don't think that we're probably where we would even want to be with all of those reports. There's a lot of things that, you know, we're starting to incorporate in from outside of healthcare into, you know, how we're looking at things like, you know, a perfect order, right? How does an order go out? Do we pay it? What does that look like? You know, how are our suppliers performing, you know, versus our expectations, you know, versus theirs. So we're starting to kind of go outside of healthcare to get some, you know, I'd say maybe more traditional, you know, views of how things would work. And we're just kind of incorporating that into our day-to-day activities.
Right. So then when you had to implement some kind of change or innovation, were there any were there any issues where like the outside of the organization, like the supply chain partners, were experiencing difficulties in adapting to those changes, or expressing kind of like concerns about those changes? Were there any issues of between firm conflicts?
No, I mean, we periodically may have something come up, but we try to make sure that we are partnering with our key suppliers so that they're aware of what is going on. And, if there is an issue that comes up, how can we jointly solve it together? We will periodically have things that, we have to deal with together, and they're very unique to a supplier. And so we're very engaged with them and stay very close to them, so that we can jointly work on, whatever the resolution is.
I see. So then going back to Kristi, so when you're implementing these technologies, you're dealing with clients and helping them out in their supply chain innovations. So then how do you follow up whether the clients are properly using those technologies and innovations up to the full potential? Are there like additional programs or like additional training that you provide to these clients? How do you make them ensure them to use that technology?
That's a good question, and I'll say me too a little bit to what Geoff said. So some of it is making sure that you've defined before you implement the solution what are the success metrics, and then you're tracking those on the back end to ensure that you're meeting those metrics and you continue to meet those metrics. So KPIs and dashboards for visibility between ourselves and also our customer being able to see those same dashboards to know what they're doing. But we also, have a team of process engineers that go in and create standard operating procedures for each of our folks that run the automation or that work with the automation, just to ensure that everybody knows how to use it and is trained on that. And that there's a program for ongoing training as we have turnover within our facilities. But we're always, we have a culture of continuous improvement based on Lean Six Sigma within the Kenco organization. And so there is always we're taking a look at it again. Are we really using the automation to the most efficient way that we could be using it? So we're also continually improving it once it's implemented. But if we've worked with an outside vendor, for instance, with the auto store, that was a massive implementation. And we worked with a system integrator that came in and worked through that project with us. Bringing them back in a year after the implementation or 2 years after to just do an assessment to say, are we doing what we thought we were going to do? Are we doing well? Right? Helps as well, because they can see from an objective viewpoint. They're not Kenco, they're not the customer, they're an outsider. They can take a look at it and say, you guys are not really optimally using this piece of it. So we've done that actually with Locus as well. We brought them in and said, look, we're struggling with this particular area, not sure why we can't seem to get the throughput in this one area. And they gave us a lot of recommendations and feedback that we could implement, therefore to continuously optimize and improve. So I think it has to be, you have to train your people well. You have to have procedures that they can get to and see, and they have to have metrics that they have visibility to. But it also is helpful to bring in, the outsiders every once in a while to take a look at it and help you continue to optimize.
I see. You briefly talked about like inside Kenco Logistics, you have like the Six Sigma program that talks about continuous improvement. Can you also talk about like the efforts building on top of that to ensure innovation and ideas are continuously flowing within your company and also with your clients? Like how do you ensure that everyone's always staying one step ahead of the game?
That is, Dr. Chung, a very difficult thing. But we have done, I've been doing this for about 7 years now, dedicated. And it's a slow culture of change, right? To start getting people into that mindset. But a couple of things. So we have an open innovation management platform where our employees at any time can go into that system and enter an idea. Hey, I have an idea for a robot that could help me do this process within this warehouse. And so they always have that ability to be generating ideas. We run inside of that platform, we run 4 challenges per year with our entire workforce. There's over 5,000 employees at Kenco. and it'll be focused. One quarter we might be focused on safety. How do we improve safety within our warehouses? And one, it may be focused on mobile apps. Like if you had a mobile app that could help you do your job better, what would that look like? So that's one way of driving it. Another way is we have a joint project management team, innovation management team with a lot of our larger customers, where we are working through what we call a warehouse of the future concept with them, that is continually evolving over time, as we research new emerging technologies, as we come into contact with startups that could be beneficial, really jointly collaboratively looking at what is their strategic plan, where are they going in the next 3 years, what are the market challenges, and then where can Kenco help them go. So there's a bit of, making sure the customers are involved in that process, because if we're doing it in a vacuum, we're probably not going to be successful. And then just listening. I mean, your best tool as an innovator is listen. You'll pick up on those problems that people are just struggling with over and over and over, and find those opportunities to solve them. So I'm constantly sitting in on business reviews with our operations and our customers, just listening to what they have to say, looking for those opportunities to really generate the new ideas. So
I see. Yeah. In the beginning, as you mentioned, definitely building an innovative culture is a difficult thing. And I can see by the extent of your efforts that there's really no one like single right way to do this. And you basically have to try everything and try to keep on the edge. Back to Geoff, could you also tell me about how Cleveland Clinic is trying to keep or build an innovation culture? And are there any examples of how you do it?
Yeah, I mean, we do similar to what Kristi said. We have a kind of an intake process that we're, I think, getting more formal with. If somebody has an idea of something they want to change, and how we can go about doing that. So that's kind of one avenue. We do work with some of our key suppliers as well. Probably more on the system side of things, as far as what's coming down the road. How can we partner together? On maybe something that we're experiencing a pain point with, or, something that we think could be industry wide. A good example is we're working with one of our partners on kind of an automated replenishment process for some of our commodity items. So we typically handle those in a 2-bin Kanban system that, someone has to go up and trigger an order, and then they have to also put it away. And so it does kind of require 2 trips to the floor. And so we've been looking at how could we automate at least the first demand signal, so that generates the order, and then someone's only going to put the product away. So things like that we're working through. But so we're kind of continuing to work through that. And I mean, not only defining, what are some of the improvements we could make, but even how can we better improve that process? How do we get the capabilities internally to make some of those adjustments and changes ourselves, versus relying on a consultant or a partner to do it for them or for us. So that's one thing that we kind of continually work on. The one thing I don't think that we've necessarily totally defined yet is that forward thinking thing, right? How do we have people that are just researching new opportunities or new things that are coming? I think that will come over the next couple of years for us, just as we're, kind of getting out of a whole bunch of implementations and changes and things like that. But that's kind of the next thing on our radar is, how do we get a little more, insightful of what's coming down the road?
Right. Thank you very much. So at this point, I think it might be probably a good time to get some questions from the audience and see what they are curious about. Actually, I have here a question that for both Geoff and Kristi. So we've both been talking about building KPIs and building dashboards around those to kind of make sure that innovation is used within the organization and to enhance compliance. From you, Geoff, can you talk about some of the examples of key performance indicators that Cleveland Clinic is using for that compliance, and how you kind of came up with those sets of key performance indicators?
Sure. So, 2 good examples is we've built, it's kind of almost actually done, is one around facility health. So it's just kind of the health of our operation. So it looks at, things that our end users care about. So, one of the most prominent things on there is stockouts. So if I don't have inventory, that's a bad thing. So, we built it around stockouts. We've built it around overstock, inventory. We look at, how quickly we're addressing recalls. So a lot of it revolves around, what our end user expects. And, in the end, the way that we've kind of approached it is that, we will have a dashboard or a KPI that shows overall performance. But that really should tie back to your in-system reporting or in-system actionable dashboards. So if I'm doing all I need to do in the system, my KPIs will be reflective of that. So that's, kind of one we've worked on. We're in process on a kind of a data health dashboard. So we've looked at, certain things like how well our item master is being used, how accurate are some of the attributes that we have or how populated they are. But it gives us good indicators of where we may have gaps that we need to address. But again, it's kind of based on the philosophy that if I'm using the system and I'm following the reporting and the kind of tasks in the system, the KPIs will kind of follow from that standpoint.
Right. Also, going to Kristi, you also mentioned about after implementing a technology to your clients, you also follow through by building a dashboard for them and managing KPIs. And I believe like the KPIs are going to be different from client to client and project to project, but just take one, for example, and can you tell us about the KPIs that you were looking into and how you came up with those KPIs?
Sure. So we have a couple of different sets of KPIs. So innovation has a KPI metric that we have to answer to, and that's really the number of ideas generated there that are actually applied in a production facility. And then, the value of those, whether that's value to the client or value to Kenco, but monetarily, what's the value of that? And then we have a number of things that we have to test, research, and deliver every year. So at the high level, the organization is managing innovation from a metrics perspective. But when you look at a specific project, generally, we're tying that project to the metrics of the facility itself, and those differ by client. But in the case of the auto store, for instance, uptime is a big measurement. I have 30,000 SKUs stored in that unit. And yes, there are backups for those on the shelf, but very small amounts. So if that system is down, my inventory is tied up. I can't have it down. So that's a big one. For that particular facility, lines per hour was a significant metric. We said we were going to achieve with the auto store a very specific, at least this many lines per hour picking. And we track that on a daily basis. Are we hitting that? Are we hitting that number? Inventory accuracy is another one in that particular unit. How many, to Geoff's point, how many stockouts are we having if people go to pick and it's not in the bin? That's a problem. We should have really high inventory accuracy there, so we're measuring that. And then just general facility metrics like dock to stock time and order drop to ship time. Those kind of things are big metrics for us.
Right. Thank you very much. Also, since now we're talking in the context of supply chains, when innovations sometimes can also come from not internally from our organization, but could also come from partners, other partners in the supply chain network. So going to Geoff, can you talk about if there were any examples in the past where an innovation was actually introduced by one of your supply chain partners where they think, hey, we have this new technology and we want to see how that would help Cleveland Clinic, and how would Cleveland Clinic respond to those kind of offerings? And then eventually, did you see them implemented in the supply chain?
I don't know if I have an example of one that we've fully implemented. We have a couple that are in process right now, but we obviously get a lot of requests maybe through our executive teams or some of our clinical leaders for something that may be more supply chain related. And so, we have a process where, we'll do a review of, what the solution is and really see if it will fit into, what we're trying to accomplish. And so again, if we're looking at, quality and patient safety, if we're looking at efficiency, it has to, in some regard, fit into something that's going to solve, for something in those areas. And so we go through a process where we'll kind of vet it out, see if it makes sense. And, if we think that it has a kind of a place in our portfolio, then we'll start to engage some of the business leaders to say, is this something that you would see valuable? Is this something that you want us to pursue? And if they kind of agree to it, then we really start to look at, is it something that we need to integrate in with our ERP? Is it something that's going to be kind of a standalone? Because that will kind of give us good visibility as to, how long it may take for us to get something implemented, what the level of effort is, and all of that. And so we, like I said, we have a couple that are in process right now that, I think are definitely promising. But it is a pretty robust process to get to that point.
I see. So Geoff, you briefly mentioned about that there are some other technologies that you're kind of looking out and see if they will be beneficial in the future or might have some potential. Can you talk about, so looking forward, can you talk about some of those examples of technologies or innovations in the supply chain that are probably emerging or you think will be big sometime in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, we've looked at a few things around, machine learning, video capture, things like that, and we've been working with a few partners on that. And again, from an efficiency standpoint, how can we reduce touches or really take advantage of what's out there? We've been having conversations of just, opportunities to improve delivery cycle time, on our couriers, anything that we send to patient homes. So those are kind of the key areas that we've been looking at right now. I think as we've kind of transformed our supply chain to be much more digital than what it was in the past. I think, the machine learning AI opportunities to, do analysis for us or to kind of do some of the transactional tasks is really the next avenue and the next area that we have to explore.
I see. Going to Kristi, can you also talk about like looking forward, future technologies, future supply chain innovations that you see some potential in?
Sure. Well, we are, much like Geoff, we are heavily invested in machine learning and AI. We have a data science team that is on board at Kenco, and they are doing a lot around predictive analytics as it comes to forecasting demand, planning labor, doing the things inside a typical warehouse that are one-time activities of an engineer, like slotting and zoning and things like that. As velocity of the product changes, as the product mix changes, just how do we keep that warehouse the most optimally run as we can? So there's a lot of activity going on in that specific area right now. But I guess one of the things we're really excited about is, we've done a lot of work around autonomous vehicles and AMRs, and the technology is great, but it's just not all the way there yet. There's still a lot of activities and a lot of decision points that have to be made by a human to enable that. And so, we're working with a startup out of California that's doing remote control lift truck operations within the warehouse. And so we're really excited about that one. It's yet to be proven, let me say it that way. That they certainly have some warehouses that are operating autonomously that way remotely today, but they're using more pallet trucks and not your traditional counterbalance or stand-up lifts. That's what we're working with them on. But for us, we have over 100 facilities across North America. And so, there are significant labor challenges in certain pockets of our population in the US. And so, it's really difficult to find people who can come to work. And if I can tap into a different workforce, whether that be wounded warriors that are incapable of operating a heavy machinery lift in a warehouse, or it's, people who are autistic and can't handle the noise level inside a traditional warehouse, or it's, someone who lives in a town that the industry has left the town, but they don't want to move away from their hometown. And suddenly now they're enabled with a remote control console and screens where they can see everything, and they can drive a lift truck in a warehouse in California. That to me is a significantly transformational piece of technology that we are excited about and looking forward to, and working with the vendor to bring that to market. We're also working with a drone vendor that's doing some really interesting things around automated battery changing. which has been the limitation of inventory drones up till now. And we're scheduled to go live next month with that particular pilot. So just, the more that we can enable an autonomous warehouse, the better off we are. And so, and that, everybody always asks me, okay, well, what you just said means there's going to be no more jobs for the people. And I'm like, no. Our goal is to upskill our people and get them to the point where they can operate the robots, where they can program the robots, where they can deliver machine learning and AI capabilities and things like that. So it's not about replacing labor, it's about changing out the skill set of the labor. So, but those are some things we're working on that we're excited about in the future.
Thank you. I just have to ask because I have like a personal research interest, but I think a lot of people coming into today's topic, when we're talking about supply chain innovations, there's this one particular keyword that we didn't discuss at all, which is blockchains. And I know there's a lot of discussion, and probably it's one of the most hyped buzzwords in the recent like 3-4 years. Going back to you, Kristi, can you make what are your thoughts on this thing called blockchains? Have you considered it, or did some kind of feasibility analysis on it? What do you think about its potential?
We have considered it. We actually sat on a standards body that was trying to build standards around blockchain for the transportation industry. And we were a part of that, developing the data standards. I do think there's promise there, but I can tell you that not a single one of my Fortune 500 clients are really asking me to go figure out blockchain. The labor and the space crisis and just supply chain, the ports, and all of that right now are taking focus away from some technologies like blockchain. I do think for even industries like Geoff is in, right? The pharmaceutical, the food, the things that people ingest that could potentially cause them harm, that becomes a much more important technology to really start looking into, I think, versus, a part for an HVAC. My customers are not getting excited about that. I think it will come. I think its time will come. But I do think the challenge for most of our customers is that fear factor of sharing that data and who's getting to see it and all of those sorts of things. So they're going to want more regulation around that before they're willing to kind of open their data banks and let that kind of flow. So that's my take on it from the perspective of my client base right now.
Thank you. Geoff, what about Cleveland Clinic?
So, I mean, we've been doing a lot that I'll probably say it's maybe blockchain light, for lack of a better word. We've tried to figure out how to increase visibility. As Kristi said, trust is a big factor because, if we ask a supplier to start sharing, exactly where everything is coming from, what ETAs are into their facility, I think their concern is that, we use it against them in some way, shape, or form. And if we have visibility to a stock out that's coming a month before anybody else does, are we buying everything, out, ahead of time and things like that. So, trust is definitely a big factor. And so we've been kind of working through, at least on that side of things, how could we better enable the visibility? What does that mean for us? What benefit does that give the supplier as well? So that is something that we have looked at. We have started to have other conversations, with some of our suppliers, and it's been very few, but just, on the more transactional side of things, how can we optimize that? We generate a lot of PO volume every day, and there has to be better ways for us to, make sure that pricing matches, to make sure that receiving matches, all of that. It's just, we generate thousands of transactions a day, and there just has to be a better way for us to handle that. But again, that we haven't had a lot of requests to explore that, maybe one or two.
Thank you. Let's take one last question from the audience, and here's a good one. Usually when we adopt an innovation, we first start with like a small pilot project, apply it to a controlled area of the organization, and then later on, depending on the outcomes of that, we would decide to scale it and apply it to the entire organization. So going to you, Geoff, when do you think is the good time to scale that innovation, like time to implement it across the entire system? Because again, waiting also comes with a cost.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it depends on, even in some cases, our ability to run a pilot. So we've had, some enhancements that we've done that are maybe configurable to a specific facility, and we can kind of test it at that facility. We just made some tweaks with a receiving process recently. We were able to tie it in with one of our go lives with an ERP, and so we tested it at one facility for a month, and then rolled it out everywhere. There's other things that we don't have a lot of flexibility from a system standpoint to do it at a facility level, and we do roll it out to everywhere at once. And in that case, it is usually things that are workflow driven. So if there's certain approvals, or if the system is routing work to certain people or certain areas, those are harder to do in a pilot. And so we just make sure that again, everyone's aware of what the change is, the kind of change management aspect of it, before we're able to implement it fully.
I see. To you, Kristi, when do you think it's the right time to scale an innovation and go like organization wide or supply chain wide?
Well, that's a little bit more difficult for me to answer because not all our innovations are applicable across all of my customer base. But I'll say we try to do a phased approach, whether it's phased as far as functionality or phased as far as how many sites are live on the tool. We certainly do a pilot, vet it out. Is it going to work in one facility? And then we'll jump up to 5, and then maybe 10, and then kind of just incrementally grow it. And we may stop. We may get to 20 and say, let's hold off right here. We've learned something that we didn't realize we need to iterate. We need to change something. So for us, it's in phases, or it may be phased functionality. We know that this is going to be a really huge change to our organization. And so we need to start with, maybe we just do some digitization of a few tasks and start there. And then we add some autonomy, and then we add some AI, and we start making decisions for people and roll it out in phases as far as the functionality, so that again, adoption can be handled. If you throw too much at people at one time, it can be complicated. But also, I'll say, as with most organizations, the financial side of it drives that. If the ROI is really, really, really significant, the organization is going to be motivated to move quicker to get that implemented and scaled across the organization.
Thank you. I just have one more question from the audience. This is for Kristi. During your projects, implementing innovations and helping out your clients, have you seen like introducing innovations, reducing payroll costs of the company?
In some cases, like I mentioned before, we often, because volatility in our organization or in our customers' business can drive us to have to peak up to 50, 60, 70 temporary staff members for a 3-month window of time. Certainly, if I can eliminate that temporary staffing, it changes the payroll costs for my organization. So and to take that a little further, we also see some increase in payroll costs in some areas, because again, I'm upskilling talent to be able to do things that are more higher functioning. However, that's typically offset by the productivity, efficiency, optimization savings that I'm getting from whatever the solution is that I'm implementing. So my payroll costs may go up a little bit, but I'm achieving a different level of savings to the bottom line of the organization because of the improved capabilities that we now have with whatever the innovation is.
Right, thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So last question to ask, back to Geoff. What do you think is the one thing you would like our attendees to take away from today's session?
I mean, I think, for me, and I think it's kind of been, you've heard it from probably both Kristi and I, is that innovation is not just dropping a technology in. There's a lot of work and effort that goes into, understanding the process, the change management, making sure that everything is ready. It's not just, dropping a piece of technology in. I think that's something that, we've definitely, learned as we've been doing this over the last 4 or 5 years, that, you have to make sure that everything is kind of working together before you're really ready to implement it.
Thank you. And Kristi, what will be that one thing that you would like our attendees to take away from today?
Well, I'll echo what Jeff said, but I won't be the me too. I'll have something else. So I think a lot of people think of innovation as, it's a bunch of great ideas and people sitting in a room with sticky notes and brainstorming and coming up with really cool stuff. And to Jeff's point, it needs to make sense. But I think the other thing I would say is that if your innovation is not applied, if it's all ideas and you never apply it to deliver value to the organization, then in my definition, it's not innovation. It's a waste of time. So I would say always have that eye toward how can I really implement this and deliver value to my organization, my customers, my patients, my whatever. But it's not about the bright shiny objects. It's about how is it going to impact my organization and in some cases the world with what I'm doing. So
Thank you very much. So with that, I just really want to thank Geoff and Kristi for all your insights and for being with us today. And I also want to thank our audience for these wonderful questions. I just want to end our today's session with an announcement that we do have another Cornerstone speaker series coming up on Wednesday, October 19th. And the topic is going to be on evaluating ESG reporting. And it will be led by Dr. Ben Hoffman from our accounting department. So we hope you join us for that webinar as well. And with that, we conclude our Cornerstone speaker series on supply chain innovation for today. So once again, thank you very much, Geoff and Kristi, for your both great insights and inputs. And it really gives me a lot to think about supply chain innovation from maybe a practitioner standpoint, but also from a research standpoint as well. So thank you very much, and wish you all have a great day.